Welcome into the Odds and Audibles podcast. Matt Preem, Eric Scopel, Jared Mack on this Monday edition of the show, Mailbag edition. But first, before we dive into a bunch of questions and a lot of hot topics that we're going to talk about, we want to remind you guys today, June 13th, is the last day you can get 60% off an annual membership to duckterritory.com. That will end tonight. And I highly encourage you guys to at least check out the story, check out the promo information. If you don't want to do a year, you can get a month for $1. So highly encourage you guys, jump in on that. Make sure you join it because, hey, big recruiting weekend this weekend, massive recruiting weekend next weekend. Fall camp starts in about 2 months. Football season is here in a little under 3 months. And next thing you know, at National Signing Day will be here. Men's and women's basketball will be here. Recruiting for both of those sports is hot and running. So make sure to save some money. Join duckterritory.com. Join our duck community and save a huge chunk of change while doing it.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start, Matt, because we are going to get into some recruiting things and we're going to give some broad stroke answers. And not that we're not going to give great detail here, but Matt has VIP information on the first two questions directly up on the site right now. And so, again, I would encourage you to go check that out. But we're going to start with a question from @Ross Makalich. Ross, you might have to correct me in the comments on how I pronounce your name. I probably butchered that. Anyway, Ross asks, does Oregon land Jaden Rashada this week, or have they shifted their focus to Deontay Moore and Avery Johnson? Hashtag Odds and Audibles. I thought this was pretty timely, Matt, because I don't think you saw this question. I don't think this is why you were typing away this morning, but you had an update probably right around 9 a.m. this morning on this very topic. And again, I don't want to give away all the VIP information, but give what you're comfortable with about where things stand for the Oregon quarterback position recruiting, because they are on some pretty darn big prospects.
Rashada commits this week, and I do not expect it to be Oregon unless there's a very big change of heart by Rashada. And I think, quite honestly, by Oregon, too. It's no secret that Rashada is factoring in, just like any other recruit, and I understand why he would do it, NIL. And the QB market has kind of been set with Nico and his insane $2 million a year deal with Tennessee. And Rashada is seeking a high amount of money. And we've heard certainly some things that Oregon is willing to, Oregon's NIL collective is willing to play ball, but not that high. And Rashada is looking for his options. And so the first part of that question, I don't think Oregon lands Rashada. Every week that goes by, the gap widens between Oregon and Rashada. Now, Avery Johnson and Deontay Moore, that's a good start for what Oregon's QB class could look like. Those two guys probably feel like the top guys right now that have the best option of landing with the Ducks.
Let's talk, I guess, briefly about what those guys are like as prospects. I think, Jared, I know that both of us have probably watched a little bit of both of these guys. First off, I also want to just dispel, Oregon could, in theory, have a quarterback opening when these guys both arrive in 23. I also just want to be cautious to, be building expectations that one of these guys comes in and immediately starts, because that was the expectation for Ty Thompson, and that has certainly not taken place. Moore is a higher-rated recruit than Ty Thompson. Johnson is not. Regardless, I really like both of these prospects quite a bit. Johnson athletically, I know they're both great athletes, but Johnson athletically, he's slighter build, is just pretty terrific in terms of his explosiveness, his speed and athleticism. I think Moore is a better passer right now. But I really like both of these kids. If you had to pick one or the other, Jared, do you have a preference right now, or are you just a big fan of both guys?
Certainly a big fan of both guys. I think if someone came up and said, hey, one of these two quarterbacks will commit to Oregon, which one would you pick? I think I'd pick Deontay Moore. I think he's the full package. I think he's a better prospect than Rashada is right now. I think has more potential. I think he's just more fluid as a quarterback, understands the game more. I think Nico Amalavai, I think he and Dante Moore would be 1 and 2. I think for a lot of schools across the country, if they can get the pick of the litter, if Oregon's in that good of a position, like Matt is saying, for Dante Moore or Avery Johnson, I think that's a good sign. I think overall it's a good sign that what you see with Kenny Dillingham and the offensive staff being in the market and getting this close to recruits, I think that's a good overall sign as well. That the recruiting, at least at quarterback, that position won't slow down anytime soon. You've seen what Carlos Lockman has done at running back too. So overall, I think all of this is a positive development. I know if in a hypothetical world, if Avery Johnson is the quarterback who commits to Oregon, there might not be a lot of happy fans about it. But Avery Johnson is certainly a capable quarterback. An Elite 11 finalist, Eric, like you're saying, a good athlete, someone who's really risen through the rankings in the last year or so, and can continue to do so with a strong senior year. I think they're both just solid quarterbacks, but in a very long-winded way of answering the question, I'd absolutely take Dante Moore over Avery Johnson. But that, again, is no dismissal of Johnson's prowess.
I mean, I would agree with that, but that's the difference between a 5-star quarterback and a top 200 guy. Dante Moore is a 5-star, and Avery Johnson is a top 200 quarterback, and I think Avery Johnson. There are probably 2 tiers here. Dante would be someone I would look at and say, Bo Nix moves on, and he's at Oregon. He's in the mix to be the starter in 2023 as a true freshman. With Avery, I would think he is someone, I would expect him to be someone that would become a starter down the road, but I would have a hard time really legitimately saying he's going to beat out Ty Thompson and Jay Butterfield for that gig in 2023. If Bo Nix had 2 years of eligibility and Avery had that year to acclimate himself, then I would be more on board with it. And I think that's the difference maybe Jared's talking about between the 2 guys is they're both really talented. They're both going to be starters at the college level. One of them is just probably more ready-made than the other one. But Avery Johnson, he's a freak athlete.
Yeah.
Like some of his dunks that he has in high school basketball are like, damn. So I hope Duck fans, if it is Avery, I hope Duck fans don't get disappointed because he's still a very, very, very talented quarterback. And is someone that's got a lot of athleticism and a lot of skill that will translate to the football field.
Moore would be the highest rated quarterback recruit Oregon has signed. Johnson would not be, but I believe Johnson would be one of the 6 or 7 highest. I should probably have prepared that in my notes here for this conversation. But Moore would take the mantle, if you will, from Ty and Kellen Clemens as the top rated quarterback signees in program history. All right, second one from @cam_122199. I don't know what those numbers stand for. I was thinking it was a year of birth, but that would maybe be like
we're a number off there.
99.
Yeah, that's a couple years away from now.
A little in the future here. So, Cam, you can also, if you care enough, to correct me what those numbers mean. If you don't want to share what those numbers mean, that's totally understandable as well. All right, I know it's early, but from what you guys have heard and the news we have seen so far, what is a realistic expectation for the 2023 recruiting class when it's all said and done? He writes in parentheses, top 5, top 10, hashtag odds and audibles. By the way, the best way to make sure you get your question answered is using the hashtag, even if it's in the thread, because a lot of the times I go and search for them outside of the thread just to make sure I catch all the questions. And that's kind of the first way I operate. So all 4 questions asked today did use the hashtag, Phil. Thanks for doing that. Matt, I'm going to throw it back to you again here because you did have another VIP story over the weekend. Projecting kind of like the best case realistic scenarios, I think how you worded it for this class. And I'm not going to ask you to name all the names because that would be a really poor for us from a business plan because we do want you to sign up for the VIP subscription, which we just promoted earlier. But maybe you can at least include kind of where you landed with a range for where the class, because I know you did the end calculated what the score would look like and how that would stack up using, I think, last year's class as a barometer for kind of where that range would hit.
Yeah, so I projected Oregon signing 25, and for that exercise, I think the number that Oregon could sign is anywhere from 20 to 30 guys. A lot of that will depend upon how many players after the season is over either transfer out, turn pro, and we're going to see some of that happen during the season. We're probably going to see some of that happen now between now and the start of the first game against Georgia as well. And so that number that they come at will depend upon what happens over the next 6 months. But for now, I'm just saying 25. It's a safe number. And honestly, the class projection that I had is right in line with its best class in school history in 2021. It's not as good, but it's right there. It's within earshot. I think it's realistic to say that this Dan Lanning staff could make a run at the best class in school history. Now, to do that, it's going to require some dominoes to fall their way. They're going to need to sign a couple 5-star players to get there. They're in contention for more than a handful of them. If you just want to start at the top of the rankings and work your way down, David Hicks is the number 5 player in the country. He's looking at Oregon. He's expected to take an official visit there. Caden Proctor, the number 10 player in the country. He is one of the guys that Oregon has the best chance at landing among the 5-star players. Dante Moore, we've already talked about him. Tony Mitchell, a cornerback from Alabama, is in there. You've got Deuce Robinson. You've also got Samson Okunola. You've got Mateo Ungalele. You've got Javier Tovino, Richard Young, Samuel Mpamba. That's the group right there. And then you also didn't even mention, or Jonte Cook, the receiver. And then you have to look at some of the high 4-star guys, a guy like Jaden Wayne, who's almost a 5-star. They're going to need to land multiple of that group to get there. I think it's realistic that they will. I don't think earlier in the year, like in January, there was all that hot buzz from the fan base that they were going to sign 4 or 5 5-star players. I don't think that's going to happen. The most they've ever signed in one class is 3 when they signed Manning, Flo, and Sewell all in one class. I think 3 is probably your best case. More realistically, maybe 2 from a 5-star perspective. But we're in that discussion right now. And, I've got them projected with 3 guys. 2 5-stars. I did have them with 3, and I changed it down to 2. But if you go read that story, the top 10 is a very realistic option for Oregon. I think top 5, you're being best case scenario and maybe ignoring some of the likelihood that some of these guys aren't going to sign with Oregon.
Yeah,
I think
go ahead, Jared.
I think we've been over this topic before on the podcast of whether Oregon, I think multiple times, like whether Oregon can sign 5 5-star prospects or 4 4-star 5-star prospects in 2023, or if they can land a top 5 recruiting class. I think we all kind of came to a resounding, it's really hard to do those things in college football nowadays during those podcast sessions. It's going to be difficult again. I do think that Oregon is certainly on its way. If you read Matt's story, which does require VIP subscription, so everybody sign up by tonight. It's going to be hard, but I do think that they've positioned themselves in a really good spot for most of these guys. Getting players on campus early, at least for an unofficial, like Samson Okunola came a week or 2 ago. He's a guy from Massachusetts, but the idea of getting him to travel across the country for an unofficial visit that's pretty darn important. You don't see that all the time. Usually you'll see kids from Southern California, Northern California, or Seattle, whatever the case may be, travel for an unofficial. But Oregon is seemingly getting a lot of kids to travel basically across the country, from the Southeast, from the Northeast, whatever the case may be, to Oregon on unofficials, which is huge because, a lot of players, once they see Oregon for the first time, they'll want to see it again for an official visit, which, allows even more of better of a recruiting trip in general. Overall, I think that the class, like Matt was saying, it's got to land a couple 5 stars if it really wants to be contention for a top 10. If you just look at the way recruiting has been the last couple of years, it's been nuts. And I think with the NIL deals, that Oregon will be a strong player, and I think it's going to become even more nuts. And they gotta, like Matt talked about with Rashada, Oregon will have to pony up for a couple guys, but I think they'll show that they will, because I think they're very serious about how they're going to be recruiting this year. And I think, with Dan Lanning's first year at the helm, I think he wants to put it out on a different level to show that Oregon is not going anywhere in terms of the recruiting world.
I think that's the next step that Oregon needs to take as a program from a recruiting perspective. Is they've shown they can land the 5-star. They've shown now that they can land the 5-star consistently. I think that next step for Oregon from a recruiting perspective is to consistently land multiple 5-stars in the same recruiting class and do it year over year. That's where, when not just 5-stars, but top 100 guys, multiple top 100 guys, like I'm talking 5, 6 top 100 guys. That's where programs make that jump from being a conference contender to a college football playoff contender.
And right before we go to break, Matt, I just wanted to say a lot of how this class is going to shake up will be determined this month, I think. And I'm not going to say it's I don't know if you're going to land a huge number of commitments, but and we're going to have full updates on who all will be here on the site on the 17th and the 24th. But these are massive recruiting weekends. There's a lot of big-time prospects lined up to visit. And if Oregon is going to sign a top 5 class and sign 3 to 4 5-stars, which, again, is best-case scenario, it's all going to come together on the 17th and the 24th and those weekends when they've got big numbers of these blue-chip 5-star top 40 recruits on campus. And honestly, I think if you're an Oregon fan, this is why a VIP subscription is valuable right now. There's going to be a lot of recruiting talk over this next 2 to 3 weeks, because there's going to be the visits, and then there's going to be the fallout after the visits, and there's possibly going to be some commitments that follow as well. So this is, it's funny because spring football comes and passes, and there's, a little bit of a slower period sometimes. Although May was pretty active in terms of landing verbal commitments, but June did not used to be like the big recruiting time of the year in terms of official visits. Things have shifted a little bit, and this month is really shaping up to be one of the biggest months. I think probably one of the biggest Junes in program history. And Oregon is positioning itself with some success this month to really maybe make a push for what we've said already is that best case with a bunch of blue chippers in a top 5 class.
11 top 200 players are going to be on campus for official visits. That's just official visits in the next 2 weeks. 5 of those guys are 5-star players on campus. Jared brought it up, and I think it's a great point that we could probably host an entire show on this one topic, but this staff's ability to get not just players to visit for unofficials or to get them to come multiple times, but for truly top 100, top 200, 5-star caliber guys, and how frequently they are coming to Eugene for unofficial visits is pretty darn impressive. I mean, I think the guy who's been here the most, that's the highest rated guy, it's Jaden Wayne, who is a 5-star for us. He's not a 5-star anymore on the composite, but I think since January, so we're 6 months in, I think he's been on campus in Eugene like 5 times. I mean, he's averaging almost once a month getting down to Eugene for an unofficial visit. I mean, that's pretty phenomenal. That's a really good job by this coaching staff to really get players on campus, because the more you get them on campus, the more likely that they're going to sign with you guys.
And I guess I just had one other thing I wasn't even sure, but there was this kind of was a hot topic on the message board a couple of days ago of all these. It sounds like there is kind of a policy in place and we talk about the unofficial visits and how impressive that is. It sounds like there is a policy in place that's probably not, there are probably exceptions to this, but where if a player is going to take an official visit to Oregon, they need to take at least one unofficial. Oregon wants a couple bites at the apple, if you will. And they want that opportunity to say, hey, if you're going to come out for an official, we're going to roll out the red carpet. We want you to have already been here once before, to kind of not entirely to prove your interest to us, but also to kind of make sure that when you do come out here, you've seen everything and it's just not one visit. So Matt mentioned there's 11 top 200s, I think you said, that are on campus the next couple of weeks, 5 stars. Those are all on officials. There's a bunch of unofficials. And the idea being, you turn those unofficials eventually into officials, maybe later in the fall, maybe later this summer. That was just a thing I heard from somebody who would know the answer to that question. And I thought it was kind of interesting because it's a little bit I know this was it's not too far off what Mario had done previously, and I think even Willie Taggart, but I think this is a little bit more of a hard and fast rule than it was previously.
All right, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have more discussion from a football perspective as well as some basketball recruiting discussion as well. All right, welcome back to the Odds and Audibles podcast. 2 questions in, 2 more to go, and a lot to discuss here on the mailbag.
Yeah, third one from @HighFlyingDucks. There's no question USC turns a corner this year with Lincoln Riley and their roster overhaul, but I think it's not just possible, but likely that UCLA remains the best team in LA. More stability and presumably better defense this year. Thoughts? #Odds and Audibles. So Jared and I, about a little over a week ago now, did a exercise on kind of predicting the win-loss records and kind of all the games throughout the conference this year. And I should also note later today, this won't be a VIP story, but it'll be a free story, I think, unless Jared wants to make it VIP, which he can. But predicting kind of the outcomes of all these games. So we've done this exercise a little bit, and I think we both landed. We think UCLA is going to win a lot of games. USC is going to win quite a few games. But I at least had head-to-head USC better than UCLA this year. And I do think USC is probably the better team, honestly. I think there is a lot of the last point made, though, I think is it's worth considering, is there is more stability in LA right now in terms of the coaching staff has been there longer. Defensively, UCLA was pretty good last year. I know they lost several guys. A couple guys went to the NFL. They also went out and added, and we talk about the roster overhaul at USC. UCLA was number 2 in the conference in the transfer portal, and they really hit it hard and bring in a handful of guys that were all conference at other schools last year. So I do think UCLA and will be pretty darn good this year. As we talked about on the podcast, they'll win a lot of games in part because they have the easiest non-conference schedule in the conference by a mile. They play a bunch of pretty crummy teams. So I think they have a pretty easy path to 8, 9, 10 wins, just assuming that they're decent or if not a little better in conference. I just don't think I see a real path to UCLA having an offense that's remotely close to USC's. As much as I want to think DTR is going to turn it around and figure it out this year, I do think UCLA has the better running back. UCLA's skill positions have been hit pretty hard to the draft and players transferring, like at receiver. But I think it is interesting that so much of the national attention is on USC right now, and I do think UCLA probably gets maybe a smidge overlooked in terms of – I do think that's going to be a really competitive game, and I think the South as a whole with USC, Utah, and UCLA is going to be really competitive for that top spot.
I think you covered the fact that USC, for whatever reason, I don't know why the reason it is, they're the sexy pick. But if I had to pick, if it was USC versus the field to win the Pac-12 South, I'm taking the field, and I don't think I even blink once doing it. Utah would be my first option, but I do like the UCLA mention here. I mean, it was about a month ago we were on this podcast, and I don't know what made us go down this tangent, but we were talking about transfers and just the pecking order in the Pac-12 and what have you. And UCLA and Chip Kelly, they've very quietly been able to assemble a pretty strong transfer portal class of guys that they signed from Power 5 players and guys that had big careers at the mid-major level or the group of 5 level. I'm not going to sit here and say UCLA is going to get second, or win the league, but it wouldn't surprise me if they maybe are that. Every year there's that one team in the conference that does way better than expected, and it wouldn't be surprising if it's them. I think they could have a 9-3 type season. I mean, there's that start to their season. I remember we discussed it. Their schedule is set up for them to go like 6-0. They could be that team that really makes a big challenge, and everyone's kind of like, whoa, what? Where did this come from?
I think it's with UCLA. I think it's a bit of fool's gold, like it was last year. They started out the season hot, and then they faced actually some good opponents and lost. But yeah, I mean, their schedule is super easy to start with Bowling Green, Alabama State, and Southern Alabama, and then Colorado. Then they start to hit real opponents in Washington, Utah, and Oregon. I like UCLA. They'll definitely have some momentum off last year. They've lost some guys in the NFL draft into the portal, but then again, they've hit the portal hard, like both of you guys have mentioned. There's a part of me that really thinks USC is going to be good, mostly because they should be good. And I know they've gone through a lot of transfer portal additions and subtractions, and the NFL draft has hurt them yet again, losing Drake London. And there's some of their offensive line the last couple of years, but they don't have Clay Helton anymore, which I don't think people understand how important that is for that program. Every year, you can look through preseason predictions for the Pac-12 South in the last couple of years, and USC is always at the top. And that's kind of become a meme in the Pac-12 community because of how they end up towards the bottom in the last couple of years. No more Clay Helton. Lincoln Riley, who I think is just a substantially better coach, who has been very good at Oklahoma, led them to multiple, college football playoff appearances. He has his guy at quarterback. He has an offense that is built around it. I know everybody's going to give me no offensive line, no defensive line. Bless you, Matt.
Thank you.
Which again, that happens at USC, but this is I think this is a different case. I agree with Matt in terms of USC versus the field. I'd probably pick the field just because I like Utah a lot. But I think USC is still the much better team compared to UCLA. I think they're just better at almost every single position, maybe except for defensive back or middle linebackers in that group. Just because we haven't seen what USC looks like on the field yet with those guys.
UCLA is better at running back, I think. Charbonnet. I think could be the best running back in the conference.
It's close. I mean, you have Charbonnet versus Travis Dye and a couple other transfers. It's pretty good to have be the better running back room. It's still good.
It is good. I'm just saying, if you're just broad strokes, there's a case to be made. UCLA's got the edge there. Charbonnet was first team all conference last year, led the league in rushing. So I think that part can't get overlooked. But I don't disagree big picture. Sure. And that's where I landed earlier of I think, and again, I'm just going to harken back to the predictions we made. I had, and I forget what you exactly had, Jared, but I had USC winning 8 games in conference, Utah winning 8, and UCLA winning 7, because I just think it's 3 really good teams and 3 pretty crappy teams. But I have UCLA winning 10 games this year because they play no one in non-conference. Yeah. I mean, they play literally, it's a very, very easy non-conference. And so the fool's gold comment you made is probably not a terrible one in terms of they probably are going to be playing in a respectable bowl game, despite being a team that probably has 1 or 2 wins over good teams with impressive winning records. It's going to be a weird year for UCLA, but I think it's a really important one for Chip Kelly, because if they aren't 8 to 10 wins, honestly, if they aren't 9 to 10 wins, because of the way the schedule plays out and how crappy I think the rest of the South is, not that they're going to fire him if he goes 8-4, maybe, but it's going to be really, really underwhelming, because this feels like the year where everything does come together for him down there, and it's been kind of a slow progression, if you will. Last year was his best year down there. If it's not even better in 22, I do think that the seat, which is already kind of hot, and there was already a lot of off-season discussion about what he was going to do, that discussion just picks up more. But if they win 10, 11 games, which probably 11 would have to be a bowl game, I think, then things feel a little differently coming out of 22 for the Bruins, I think. All right, last one from Andrew C8901_C. Love the numbers. What's your guys' take on Dior Johnson's release from his letter of intent? Any insight on what happened? What does this mean for next year's men's basketball team? #OttsAndAudibles. Matt, you also wrote a VIP story on a little bit of this. This happened, 3 or 4 days ago.
Yeah.
This is something that I know you've been, and we've all been, because of you, a little bit aware of for, gosh, a pretty good amount of time. Share whatever you feel comfortable with kind of what went down with Dior. And then we just did a podcast where we talked a little bit about looking at the season. And how adversely, I guess, does this impact your expectations for the 22-23 season for Niner?
This is kind of one of those deals where I'm going to look like, oh, I knew this, but I never said anything about it. And so I tried to, I understand how that's going to look. But I tried to drop a couple hints here and there, like, hey, like something may happen, be prepared. Something could happen. I said on the board a couple times over the last couple months that Dior's been at a lot of high schools, and that makes it hard for anybody, no matter how smart you are. And he is a smart kid, and he's a good kid to get into school. Most recently, I did like a projecting, a look at the roster, and I included him in it. And I did say, though, that they continue to add players. It means one person is not going to be on this roster on the 13. And I put that in there for a reason. So it does. I want to mention that.
Okay.
For me, this was no surprise. There's some things that you can report and some things you can't, and this was one of them that I really couldn't say until it happened. And so for me, I'm not really surprised. If you notice the schools that he's now considering, Pitt, Mississippi State, and Washington State, none of those are tournament teams. I think it's very interesting that he's now available on college recruiting again, and none of the big boys are really, they've got room. There's plenty of schools that are big time programs, high caliber programs that have room on their rosters, and they're not going after him. I think that's interesting. How does it impact Oregon in 2022, 2023? I think it hurts their depth. It doesn't hurt their starting lineup because I don't think he was going to start once, it was pretty much a lock once Will did not keep his name in the NBA draft and is now back at Oregon for a 5th year. Once that happened, this basically made it, case closed. Any chance that, he was going to get into school and stick with Oregon kind of closed there because Will's a better player. I think Keyshawn Bartholomew is a better player for what you're going to get out of Dior in 1 year of college basketball. That's the thing. He was going to be at Oregon for 1 season. It wasn't going to be a long-term deal. Now, if you ask me, hey, would you rather have 4 years of Dior Johnson or 1 year of Will, or 4 years of Dior Johnson, or maybe 2 years of Keyshawn Bartholomew, or 1 year of Jermaine Couisnard, I would take Dior. But that wasn't going to be the case. And so I think from an impact perspective, it kind of sounds like we didn't want him anyways, but it's not, but I don't know if it is, but I just don't think this really impacts much. They've recruited to handle this with the additions of Couisnard and Bartholomew. They've added Tyrone Williams, the JUCO shooting guard. Rivaldo Soares is back. Will Richardson is back. They've added Brennan Rigsby, another JUCO guard. So they've kind of overhauled their guards even when he was committed. So I just don't think this really is going to impact things. He wasn't going to be a starter. He probably wasn't going to be your number 1 guard off the bench. Or if he was, it was going to be a 1A and a 1B scenario. Now, if Oregon has injuries, if Oregon has some guys that struggle, like we saw Will struggle last year. So if multiple guys struggle or if multiple guys get hurt, then yeah, the depth will be tested and the loss of Dior will rear its ugly head. But you're asking for a couple things that one of which may happen, maybe not both. So I think it's a very minimal impact from a short term perspective.
He's a really talented player. He's a really fun player to watch. His highlights are great. But yeah, Matt, if it's 1 year and he's not going to start, and they recruited guys who are more experienced that maybe fit the system better.
Right. That's
kind of adds up.
It's going to be something of an impact, but I think Matt, basically hit the nail on the head that it's not going to be that big of an impact. I think the writing has been on the wall, and like Eric kind of let us in on this topic, that we've been informed on this for a while. But if you've paid attention to what Oregon has been doing the last couple months, I think there has to have been some kind of direct notice. I mean, Keyshawn Bartholomew bringing in a backup point guard when you're bringing in a 4-star and a 5-star previously ranked point guard, that doesn't make the biggest, much of sense. If you're just looking at it from a general perspective, it's like, wouldn't you want to play the true freshman who does have the 4-year eligibility, who is highly ranked? And Oregon said, no, we're going to bring in a transfer junior from Colorado instead. And then Jermaine Couisnard, who isn't much of a primary ball handler, but he's still a guard. He's still going to play potentially a big point guard, or at least a 2. The writing's been on the wall, and even Brendan Rigsby, who I don't think is going to play that often, but is listed as a point guard. I think the writing's been on the wall from Oregon for a little bit now, and I'm sad. I would have liked to have seen Dior Johnson lace up for the Ducks and seen him do some things in the green and yellow scrimmage, because I think that was going to be probably his biggest moment to shine when it doesn't really matter. But now he has a list of Pittsburgh, Washington State, and what's the other one?
Mississippi State.
Pitt, Mississippi State, and Washington State.
That's an interesting trio.
I don't think he does any of them, to be honest with you.
I think it's interesting. I think that's probably the list of schools who said, hey, we could probably get you in, because it's June 13th. This is not usually how being accepted and going into college works. So if Dior is having trouble getting into college at this point, it's going to be tough for him. And I think Matt is definitely onto something I don't think that he's going to go to any of those 3 schools. It's just go ahead.
Sorry, just one thought on that is, I know you're going to say, well, it's June 13th. There are not a lot of schools available. They don't have room. But if the 3 of us had an idea this was happening, I'm pretty sure schools across the country had an idea. He probably wasn't going to stick with Oregon. And if they really wanted to throw their name in the ring or whatever, they would have been around right now. If Kansas or Kentucky or UCLA or Arizona or those type of schools were lurking, going, he's not going to end up at Oregon, they'd be in the mix, and they're not. I think that says a little something too.
I think it does too, but I also think it's just trying to get a kid in at this point during the school year. I don't know what the admissions process looks like at Pitt, Miss State, or Wazoo, but I have to have some sort of feeling that you're right, Eric, and that school's new, but it's so far past like all the deadlines, and I don't know what schools and their academic acceptance looks like at this point. A part of me has to believe that those 3 schools that he named, which are random as heck, realistically, those are the 3 that said, hey, we could probably get you in. We're not 100% sure, but it looks good. And Dior's like, yes, that's exactly what I need. Just need somewhere to go at this point.
I mean, you look at this class, or you look at this roster as it sits. They now have 12 players on scholarship. There really isn't like a deficiency from a depth perspective at its roster. They have 2, technically 3 primary ball handlers: Richardson, Bartholomew, Rigsby. They've got multiple wings that can play on the perimeter in Williams, Couisnard, Soares, and then you've also got Bartholomew and Richardson and Rigsby that can fit those roles. You've got your forwards and Ethan Butler, Quincy Guerrier, and then you've got your big men and Dante and Biddle and Ware and Luke Ware. And so, like, they're really, like, last year the issue has always been like, hey, they only got 3 guards on its roster, and they have to start 3 guards, and that put them in a really tough bind. This year's team is different, and that's why I don't feel like like, yes, there is going to be an impact when you lose a top 50 player and a guy that's as talented as Dior. Like you drop a little bit in terms of just your overall talent on your roster. But Oregon's got the experienced players. They've got the numbers kind of allocated correctly now on its roster where they can handle this. And it sucks that Dior's not going to be here, but it doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't make Oregon a team that was, let's say, a Sweet 16 team with him on its roster to now maybe not even making the NCAA tournament without him. Like, I still look at this team and say, even without Dior, they should be a Sweet 16 team. Like, they should be a team that if they lose in the second round of the NCAA tournament, you're going to kind of be like, well, they won a game, but they probably should have won at least one more. Like, it was a good year, but it still should have been even better. And Dior's addition or subtraction doesn't really change that narrative for me. All right. That's going to do it for us here on the Odds and Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for submitting your questions. Make sure to go to duckterritory.com and get 60% off your annual subscription or get a month-to-month subscription for $1 for your first month. That promo ends Monday night. Today is the last day that it will be running, so make sure to check that out if you still can. Until the next one, you've been listening to the Odds and Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.